Leopold, that miserable floor layer from Schrems, a nobody in world history, sat in the compartment of the train heading from the dreary Waldviertel to Italy. When the train reached the Innsbruck main station, it was night. The lights on the platform flickered and glowed like the last convulsions of an exhausted life. Leopold, a bloated image of a human being, stared out the window and desperately tried to find something positive in the lights, but in vain. Suddenly, as is always the case when one is lulled into a moment of peace, the murmur on the platform broke out like a storm. A gang of youths appeared. These despicable, sneaker-wearing, jeans-clad, sweatshirt-covered youths with closely cropped hair and baseball caps who had no idea of decency and manners. They kicked each other in the face with grotesque contortions, as if they had no idea what suffering meant. Leopold, who, in contrast, knew the burden of existence as a hard-working floor layer, watched them with a reluctant mix of fear, respect, and recognition. He, the cozy Waldviertler, who never had any interest in sports. Work was his lifeblood. He also worked off the books after regular working hours because only money mattered. Why he needed it, he didn't know, but it was good to have it. A train trip to Italy. What an absurd idea, one of his rare pleasures, which brought him no comfort either. Leopold, with his bloated face, big belly, and misshapen upper arms, his greasy hair curled into slight natural curls, a face that couldn't harm a fly. How pathetic. So he looked out the window, and the train stopped, longer than necessary. Then, as if to humiliate him, one of the youths boarded the train and sat across from him. "Where are you from?" the intruder asked, breaking into loud laughter. "Schrems? Never heard of it. Where is that supposed to be?" This arrogant demeanor, this smugness, this ignorance of the quiet existence of the Waldviertel. But Leopold was not provoked. He couldn't let anyone talk badly about his Schrems. The young intruder talked and talked. He told of Malcolm X, a name Leopold had never heard. Karl Moik, yes, he knew him, but Malcolm X? What an absurd comparison. The intruder seemed amused by Leopold's ignorance and lectured further. He spoke of a man who was born as Malcolm Little in a world of hatred and violence, growing up on the dusty streets of Omaha. A man whose father was murdered by racist fanatics and whose mother was put in an insane asylum. A man who rose from a petty criminal and pimp to a leading figure in the civil rights movement, who fought against the injustice deeply rooted in American society. Malcolm X, who educated himself in prison, who embraced Islam, who stood up against the oppression of blacks. A man who fought not only against white oppressors, but also against the sluggish resignation of his own people. The young intruder talked about Malcolm X, who went on a pilgrimage to Mecca and radically changed his views, who realized that the fight against injustice went beyond races, that it was a fight of humanity. Leopold listened, unable to understand the fascination of the youth. He only knew the quiet resignation of the Waldviertel, not the burning anger and unwavering determination of a Malcolm X. The intruder seemed amused by Leopold's ignorance and lectured further until he abruptly stopped and said goodbye. He disappeared into the night, somewhere between the south of Innsbruck and the Italian border. Leopold remained alone in the compartment, left in his misery. Alone again. But now he could let his thoughts run free, those miserable thoughts. Malcolm X, Innsbruck, the incomprehensible fascination of youth for violence and struggle, his own impending arrival in Italy. Leopold thought of his profession as a floor layer, the meaninglessness of his existence, and the life of Malcolm X. He desperately searched for a connection, for meaning, but all that remained was exhaustion. The thoughts overwhelmed him. He closed his eyes and fell into a deep sleep plagued by dreams. The train rattled on, relentlessly, heading south towards Italy, without regard for the misery it carried.